Hello, in this video we're going to set up formation movements and offsets for our characters. We're going to add a HUD to control our formations. So we'll be able to change the different formations, change our spacing. We'll be setting up data assets for our formation types and C++ base classes for our HUDs. If you would like to follow on exactly with what I'm doing, ensure that you've followed the data-driven UI video where I set up just the UI for the formations. We're going to be using this and adding to this as well for this tutorial. We'll start this tutorial though creating the C++ classes that we need. We're going to make a base class for our selector that we made in the previous tutorial. So it'll be a user widget. And we'll call this the formation selector widget. And we'll put that into UI. Let's go into that UI folder. The other class we're going to need is another user widget. We're just going to create a widget for our HUD so we can add the formation selector to our HUD. And I'll show you how I do HUD setups in this process. So we'll just call this HUD widget UI. And the third C++ class we're going to create is a primary data asset. So this is going to be the data assets that are our actual formations, and they'll hold all the data we need for a formation. So later on when your game gets more advanced, you can just add the data to these data files and you've got access to it in your code. It's a bit of a setup to do at the start, but it's very useful later on. And a good example of that is formations where you want a formation to display a picture of what the formation is, then you can include that in the data file and it's all just there and you can pull whatever data you need. But you'll see, well, I'm going to use it for the offset of the formations and just a display name for now, but you'll see the benefit of it. This will be a primary data asset. And I'll call this just formation data asset and I'll put it in a data folder. Alright, so I'm just going to fix these 6pp files. Start in the data asset because you may need to restart the project a couple of times to get data assets working, I've found, but we'll see how we go. This file is the template of the data asset. So when we go into the editor and we right click and say create data asset, it'll ask you for a base class to base it off, and this is what this file is. So the first thing I'm going to add, which is sort of generic to every data asset that you want, is the data type. So this is what the Unreal Engine will use to look up what type of data this asset is and grab it, and you'll see that set up later on. And this is just an override for this get primary asset ID, and it's allowing it to look it up by name. And this will make more sense as we go. But for our actual parameters for our data asset, we're going to have our formation type, and I'm putting these into different categories here. I don't really have a lot, but I'll show you how that displays with different categories. Doesn't matter what order they're in, but the formation type, I'm just going to put a display name in. Not really going to use that for this example, but it just shows you how you can add more data to this. This will be the offset, and it will be an option for alternating formation positions. So rather than just be, like the leader and then to his right is next, and the right is the right is next, you can go left, right, left, right, left, right. It makes more sense for like a wedge formation or something like that, but we'll play with that. And that's it for that. That's all we need. Let's tidy this up. Let's do our HUD class next. This will be a base class for our HUD for the entire game. And the way you should do it, and the way I've seen Unreal recommends you do it, is you have one class that has the canvas panel, and this class just loads in every other HUD that you need. So based on what your game mode is up to, whether you're in a menu or you're in the actual game loading game HUDs, this thing handles it all, and you just have one of them. And the rest are just plug-in HUDs like our formation menu. So we're going to need an initializer for the HUD. We're going to need a reference. Our HUD at the moment is really only going to have one thing, and that's the formation selector. So that we're going to have a reference to that, and we're binding that. For that hub feature, we want to have some control over it. So we're going to have a function to enable it and disable it. And what we'll do is we'll use that for when you select units, it'll show the HUD, and when you don't have anyone selected, it'll hide it. And we're gonna have a binding to our player controller so we can update our display. So we're just gonna add a reference to our player controller, which we'll set on the initialization. I'm just gonna build these. So I don't know if you've seen these before, but this assertion before that there's other ones that Unreal has. I'll put a link to the doco page in the description, but there's verify, there's check, and so what you can do is you can assign a variable and sort of just run a check, and what happens is if it's null, it doesn't crash the game, it sort of just gives you an error, so failed verification or failed assertion. When the game's actually built, it chops this code out and just has your assignment there. So just a handy way to test without, when you want to test things and you don't want the game to just crash on you. I'm sure it's got other superpowers that it could be used for, but I'm just starting to get to know them. We're going to disable our HUD. That'll call our function down here, which we haven't set up yet. That'll just turn it off when the HUD's loaded initially. And then we want to bind to the on-selected delegate on our player controller. So if you add our player, I'll just that's have a look. Okay, so that's in a protected section. That's what that error is, and just move that up. This is on the player controller. So we're just moving this on selected delegate. So this is our delegate up here, and this is fired every time we select or deselect units. If I go to you can see there when the selected array is replicated, it'll fire this delegate. So that's being in an on-rep, that means it's going to fire on the client, so it'll work on a HUD. All UI is only local when you talk about server client. So only local users have HUD. So it needs to be, this broadcast needs to occur on the client, which it does in an on-rep. So that'll fire off our on-selected updated function every time the selection changes, which we'll update in a second. So for our set formation selection widget to display or not to display, we just need to set its visibility. So I'm just going to include our formation selection widget, which we haven't set up yet. We're going to use this passed in bool just to say if it's true, it's visible, if it's false, it's hidden. Now for our on selection updated, we want to check our player reference again. But for this, what we want to do, so we want to turn this off and on, whether we have units selected or not. So what we're going to do is go back to the player controller, because we don't have access to our selected array here. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a public function. We'll just put it in here. And we're going to return a bool. And let's just say has group selection. And don't need to pass anything in. But what we need to do is return. So we only want the selection menu to come up if we've selected more than one unit, because you can't really have a formation without more than one unit or spacing or anything like that. So we'll just we'll get our selected count, and if that is greater than 1, so that will return true, and that means we've selected more than one, and we can make this const. If you haven't used const before, it stands for constant and means that nothing in this function is going to change a variable. So here we're just reading something and sending back a true or false. We're not actually altering the selected array or anything like that. And it's just, it does different things with memory when it doesn't have to change things. It sort of gives it only a read permission rather than a write permission, or both. So we'll be able to use this now to just feed straight into our HUD off and on. So if we call our function here, set formation selection widget, we can just pass in our S player. So our player controller has a group selection, and that'll be pass through true or false, whether we have a selection or not, and turn it off and on. Each time a selection changes, it'll just handle that for us. All right, so that's the HUD widget good to go, and this will grow as you get more HUDs in your game, or more UI to display on your HUD, I should say. All right, so the next one is our actual base class for our formation selector widget. Well, we'll have initialize. They all generally have an initialize, but we're going to want a reference to each button that we have. So we're going to have a button for each formation that we have, and that's going to be our new Butte button that we made in our last tutorial. And the other thing we're going to add in this, once we get back into the editor, is we're going to add a slider for spacing. So I'm just going to add another widget binding to a U slider, and this will be to control our distance. All right, so now we need some functionality in here. And the first one's going to be is that we selected one of those buttons. So all these buttons can all just go to the one function because they're going to pass this index, which tells us between the difference between them. Without that index, then we'd have to have a function for every button, and you get a lot of code repetition that way. So we'll build that function and build our initializer. We're going to need, we could make the spacing slider a separate, if we had multiple UI where we wanted to use just a generic space like slider for a number, then we could actually make that a separate C++ class and include it as its own button type thing, like we've done with the formation button. But for now, we're just going to throw this in here and add it in like any other, like a normal slider. So we're going to need a function for when the slider value changes. So we'll just build that one. And then we just need some variables. So we're going to need, actually I think we only need a reference to our player controller because that's who we're going to be talking to. So again, we just need to set that player controller reference. I'm going to use the same setup there with the verify, include those classes that we need. And now we need to bind all our on-clicked for our buttons so we can launch it. We need to check each button is valid. We need to bind the delegate to our on formation button clicked here. So the button's got that on clicked delegate, and we're going to, every time it's clicked, we're going to launch this function down here. We just need to include the formation button class. So we're going to do the same for the other buttons, just checking that it's valid, and then we'll just do one for the spacer as well, and that's going to go directly to our on spacing value changed, and we'll need to include the slider class reference at the top. Now the other thing we need to do is set a default formation when it loads. So we can do this by just acting like we click the button. We'll use line formation as our default one. We can say as we're loading this UI, we've clicked this button, and it's going to do our process of like it actually clicked the button. And we'll need to do the same for spacing. Otherwise the spacing is going to be 0 and it's going to wig out. All our calculations will be 0. We won't get any spacing between them when we try and select different formations. And I'm just grabbing the value from the actual slider here and passing it to this on value change to set that, whereas normally it would come from the slider event, which is on value changed. That's a default slider delegate. Right, now we need to talk to our player controller. But what we need to do first is we need to set up some functions to handle these values. So we want to have a function to update the formation that we just selected and a function to handle the spacing we just selected. So we'll add this in our command functions here, and they're going to have to be public because they're getting referenced externally. And the first one will be just update formation, and it's going to pass in an E formation. We can make that const actually because we're not going to be editing the formation. And then the other one we're going to need, I'm just going to duplicate this one and say update spacing. But this one will just be this will just be a float. And I'll call it formation spacing. And now we can build these. We want to assign these values somewhere, so we've got a stored value of what the current formation is and what the current spacing is, because we'll need those in our calculations when we try and move. So in protected here, I'm just going to add two variables for that. So it'll be the current formation and the current formation spacing. So we might need to, that'll conflict the name actually. Change this to new spacing. And then here we can set those straight away. So current formation equals that formation we just passed in. Formation spacing equals new spacing. We're going to do some more in these functions, but we'll come back to that. We'll go back and finish our select the widget first. So when we click any of the formation buttons, we're going to be talking to our player controller component. So make sure that's valid. And we're going to just update that formation. And because we've converted the formation to an index, we just need to convert it back now to a E formation, and we can do that via cast. So you just need to cast index to the enum value, just like that. And then for the spacing, we can just pass the direct float. And that's just that function we just created. Update, what do I call it? Update spacing, was it? Yep. So that is our formation selector widget completed. Now what we might do is we've got to set up some data asset stuff in the editor, and we needed to restart after we made our formation data. So what we might do is restart now and set up the data asset stuff in the editor. Back in the editor, we'll go to our UI and we'll create our HUD class. So it was HUD widget. And we'll just call this widget HUD. Open that up. We'll come back to this. Our formation selector, we want to just change the base class to our formation selector C++ class. So to change the parent class, we just go over to the graph, class settings, and parent widgets here. And we can just search for our, oh, there it is there, formation selector widget. And we know it's not this one because we've got the W in front of it. So formation selector widget is our C++ class. And it's gone, hey, where's these buttons? And it's looking for our button names. So we'll go back to designer. And we'll just change our names here to what it needs to be. So it was line button, column button, wedge button, blob button. And the other thing we need to add is our slider. So I'm going to add the slider along the top here. So I'm going to wrap this in a vertical box. And then in this vertical box, I'm going to add a horizontal box. I'll put that above the buttons. And in here, I'll add text. As you can hear my dog cooking, it's because there's food being cooked in the kitchen and he wants it. And then we'll add our slider next to that. And we'll make that fill. We'll add some left and right padding. Make it 10. Bring it in a bit. Bring the text size down. No, 10. Change this to spacing. Maybe give that some 10 on the left as well. Box. That's some top and bottom padding, just to step it off the buttons. And then for our slider, call our slider was spacing slider, I think. We'll find out in a second. Because it's either going to build or not build. Oh, it's built, so that's what I called it, spacing slider. And then for this, we're going to want a default spacing, so let's put that at 2 meters. We'll make the minimum value 1 meter and the max value 10 meters. You can play with those. The step size, we don't want it too small, so we'll just set half a meter each notch on the slider, that is. So that should be good. Save that. That's our formation selector done. Let's do our HUD. So this is where we want our canvas panel, and this is where you can fix things to it. So you can anchor points to it, and this is what uses more resources than the other. So as soon as you add a canvas panel, you're adding more overhead to your UI. So that's why you'd have this base HUD class and only have one. So we need to add our formation HUD. So come down, formation selector, and we're going to anchor this. If you hold Control and Alt and click these, it moves it for you, or resets all the numbers. And we want it halfway on the X, and we want it to fit content, and we'll move it up 1.1. There we go, that's off the bottom, so that should be alright. Oh yeah, we have to rename it. So what do we call it? Formation selection widget. That's to bind our reference in C++. That should be good there now. I might just add, just because we've got nothing else on our HUD right now, and this is not always going to show, I'm just going to add a text. The top left is fine. And I'm just going to say HUD or something, just so we know the HUD has loaded successfully and we're not wondering why things aren't working. We don't even have a HUD on. So that was just something to show that the HUD is there. You can take that out once it's working or whatever. Right, so I said I was going to do assets and we ended up doing HUD. So let's do the asset. So if you go to your project settings, so settings, project settings, and go to asset manager, and then these primary asset types to scan is where we want to add our new asset. Actually, what we'll do first is we'll just create a folder for them. So we'll create another data folder, and we'll just put them in there, because it will ask us, we'll have to put a folder in there where we want it to scan. So we'll add a new asset type here, and we're going to call it formation data. And the base class is that class that we made. So it was, I think it was formation data as well, wasn't it? Or formation data asset, there it is. So that's our base class. We don't have any blueprints of this, so that's fine. And then in the directories, we want to add a directory to scan, and then we point it to our data folder. And that's it. So now we can use this to look up our data assets for formations, and let's create those next. So in our data folder, we're going to go to miscellaneous data asset, and we're going to find that formation database class. And we'll call this one DA for data asset, and this will be line formation. And here's our settings. So the data type is what we just put in the project settings to scan, and this will allow you to look up all data assets of this type, and we'll be doing that shortly. We'll use this name to look up formations. So later when you comes to you want to add a new formation, then you just create a new data asset and it's automatically going to be added to all where you reference it. You just need to add the code to deal with it. So yep, this is line formation. Our offset, so a line, the way this offset's going to work is you've got your X, which is forward and back, Y is left and right, and we don't need to use Z because it's not going up in the air. But if you're doing a space game or something, you might want to do that. But so the X forward and back for a line formation, they're side by side. So X is going to be on the same same forward and back. but it's going to be, spaced, our spacing to the right. So we're just going to put 1 here, and that'll be our multiplier for each unit. It'll be 1 on the Y, and then we times that by the index and the spacing, and we get our position. And I won't go too much more explanation into that because we're going to do it, and you'll see it. And this is just that display name that I'm just going to put something in here. We're not going to use this right now, but if you're displaying this in a UI or something like that, you could have a different description here. So, like I was saying before, if you had an image you want to use for a line formation, you could put that in here and you can reference it and preload it and unload it and do all sorts of cool things with the data asset. But we're keeping it simple for this one, but I still want to show how to use and get all the data assets, because awesome way of handling data, particularly later on when it starts getting madness. All right, so let's create the other ones now. We can just duplicate that and change this one. This can be our column. Let's move that line. DA column. Just change this information in here. So column is the opposite to line. It's going to be, you want every columns where you're one after the other in like a party line. So this is going to be -1. So you want everyone behind the leader. So 1 backwards. This will be column. And the formation data is already set. So next one, duplicate this one again. This one will be wedge. Select our wedge formation. Now wedge is a bit different because it's back 1 and to the right 1. So we're going to say -1 and 1. So you can make any combination of formation here just by using different offsets. And we'll do some different stuff for the blob. That's why I put the blob in, so you can do shapes and stuff. And that's the last one actually, blob. So for blob, we're not going to really use this offset. We're going to do a different method, but we'll just put that to 0. Blob. I think I forgot to change the name on the wedge. Actually, the other thing I want to do with wedge was change it to alternating. And the description to wedge. There we go. So that's all our data assets done. Close those off now. Now we can go back to C++. We need to add an additional piece to our AI data here. So we want to add in here, we want to add a source location. So I'm just going to duplicate this location here, change this to source location, and then I'll add this in here. It's just going to be the same as that. And then in the actual, I won't feed this in as a parameter. What I'm going to do is just duplicate this one, and we'll just set it to the in location, because that's what it's going to be. We just need a location for all, the same location for all units to reference off to calculate their offset. So this will be the location of the group leader, for example. Now we'll go to our player controller. And the first thing we'll do before we get on to the formation data assets, we'll just add our HUD. I'm just going to add a section down here for UI. And we're just going to need a couple of parameters here to set this up. We're going to need a function to create our HUD. We're going to need a reference to the HUD class. So this will be a reference to our blueprint that we want to actually create on the screen. And then this will be the actual reference to our spawned HUD or created HUD. So create our HUD here. The first thing we're going to check is if that HUD class has been actually assigned in blueprints and we have a proper reference to it. And then we'll, we need to in order to be able to use create widget, you need to add the user widget class. That sorts that out, and this is just capitalization mess up by me. So we're getting the world reference and using that class to create our HUD class and assigning it to that reference. And then if that's all valid, we want to just add it to the viewport, and that'll want to include our HUD widget reference, or class reference. So now we want to create the HUD on begin play. On that. That's that. So that'll add our HUD to the screen, it'll create our formation selector, and then it will turn it off. So we are good to go there. Now the next thing we want to do is create our formation data. So we'll need a function for that, but that's also going to have to be kicked off in begin play. So to make this protected, so this is going to be where we start grabbing those primary data assets. Before I forget, I'm just going to put this in begin play now because I will forget. And we'll be wondering why it's not working. So I'll put this here. So this is how you grab formation data. So we're going to need a reference to the asset type, which is what we added in the project settings, that formation data. This function will retrieve all data assets of this type and stick them in this array here. We need to add an asset manager reference. We might as well make that a property. I'll just put it here for now, since that's where we're using it. And this will want a reference to the class. So include engine asset manager. So now we have an array of the assets, and we can just go ahead and start loading that. So if we actually found some data assets, I'll just paste this in and explain it. So the bundles is something we don't really need to worry about. It's just an empty array. So that's just an empty array there. The bundles it's a way of loading specific stuff from a data asset. We don't have to worry about that for now. But what this is doing is it's creating a delegate for when our assets are loaded. So we can pass our formations to this function, and then we use the asset manager. We say we want to load all these primary assets, and when you're finished loading them, fire this delegate, which is this function basically. So it's telling it to fire a function when the data is loaded. So let's create this function, and it's going to need an array. We're going to pass in the asset IDs into the array. And then in here, we're just going to loop over the data array and cast to our data asset. So it's getting the physical asset object from the primary asset ID, and you're basically getting access to that base class. And then we're going to have an array of formation data assets that we can just reference for when we need to reference our formations. So we'll come back here. We'll add that array as a variable here. So we'll put it underneath here. It's an array of formation data asset, and we're just adding the actual physical data to an array. So you can either do this preemptively. So I'm getting every formation data asset there is. I'm getting one, and I'm building this array. The other option is to only use it when we need it. So we could just store these primary asset IDs in an array, and then when we choose a formation, we can just do this to get the data when we need it only. So it's only that one data's ever loaded. But given it's not that much data, it's a few numbers and things, so like I'm just loading them all and putting them in an array. So the other thing we're going to need now is in this array, these are going to be in any type of order. We don't really know the load order, so we can't just use our enum to say, index 0 is line formation and index 1 is column. It might not be the case. So we're going to need a function to get the formation data that we need. I'll put this up here, get formation data, and it's going to return that data asset. And so what we need to do here is loop over all our formation data and say, hey, is it the same type as our current formation? Because we're going to want the information for our current formation, and if it is, return that formation data so we can use it. And we'll be using this in our formation position calculations. So yeah, we're checking the formation type on the data is the same as the current formation. Let's do that position calculation. So I'm calling it a calculation for offset. So because that's sort of what we're doing. We're using that offset from the formation data, and we're calculating each selected unit's offset from the leader. So for this, we're going to pass in the unit's index and the command data. So that's the order to move, because it's going to have information we need in it. So this is going to need to be called when we issuing the command on the server in here or before here. What we want to do is we want to update. So this is going through each unit. We want to update each unit's command data with its own personal location, which will be its formation position. So what we'll do is we'll pass in the index here and the command data, and we're passing that command data as a reference. So what that means is we're not creating a new command data. We're passing this one in and returning it back to here, and then we're using that command data on the command move to location. So it'll be a command data that has the location updated for this unit. And that's why we needed the source location that we added to the AI data, because we're going to be updating this one with each unit's personal position. We need this one to reference the original position so we can calculate the offset. So now that we're calling that, we need to set it up. So the first thing we want to do is just check that we actually have formation data. If we don't have any formation data, then we just want to use the command data position. We don't want to do anything. So that command data, like I said, will be passed in, it'll be passed back, and it'll just be the same. There's be no changes made to it. Now we need to get the data that for our current formation, and we'll use our get formation data function there. So now we've got a reference to the formation, all the formation information that we have. So the first thing we'll get is that offset that we added. So that's the one left and one forward or back. That's that number there. Because I said the blob isn't going to really use that offset, what we want to have is a setup so we can handle those cases for different formations that aren't just going to use a simple offset. You might want to do we're going to do some different maths for our blob formation. And so what we'll need now is a switch. So we want to switch on the formation type, but we only need to switch on the different ones, because if they're just using an offset, we can use that as our default. Yeah, we'll make that switch. So we'll get the formation data and just check what the current type is, so the formation type, and we can switch on that. And then the default will be what we do, like by default. But if there's any special cases like our blob, then we can handle those here by just adding a case, and we'll need to break so we don't do default. So now we can handle both cases here. So we've got a special blob and we've got just a regular offset. So we'll just do the regular offset first. And the first thing we want to check is if the formation is an alternating one or it's just normal. So grab that from the data. And if it is alternating, then we need to flip every second unit's side. So we need to say, okay, your left, your right, your left, your right. And the way we do that is using a mod. So we're going to grab the unit's index, modded by 2, and it's either going to equal 0 or 1. If you ever want to check like mod calculations, so you don't know what it's doing, you can, as long as if you're the Windows calculator, it's just got to be in scientific mode instead of standard. So you just change it to scientific, and we can so our index is say 4, and we can go mod by 2, and mod is just getting the remainder, so it's 4 divided by 2, there's no remainder, so it's 0. Now if I go to the next unit, 5 mod 2, it equals 1, so we're going 0 1 0 1. Next one, 6 mod 2, 0 again. So you can use that 0 1 as left and right. And that's exactly what we're doing here, saying if it's, say, left, then we're reversing the y-axis. So we're saying your left, your right, your left, your right. So we know if it's left or right, but now we have to keep it on the same row. So this is what this is going to do. And I've got an Excel to show this. So say we're using the alternating setup on our wedge formation. So a wedge formation looks like this. It's got 2 units each row except for the first one. So it's quite complex to build with just a left, right, and whatever. So and this alternating value here. This calculation is this calculation here. So we're getting our offset whether it's left or right, and we're just flooring the index plus 1. So it's by dividing it by 2, we're sort of making it stay the same over 2. I can demonstrate it here. So if our index is 1, then we're in row 1. Now if my index is 2, so I'm the third unit, my index is still 1. And then if I'm the third guy, I've now jumped to row 2, I'm 2, and 4 should still be on row 2, and so on forever and ever. It sort of just gives you two numbers per row, and it keeps that left and right going down. I hope that makes sense, but the math's there anyway. Now, if we're not doing the alternative, we just need to do a straight offset calculations. We're just getting the index times the spacing times the offset. And then at the end, we just need to, outside this switch here, we just need to rotate. So this is what turns the offset into local space. So whatever the rotation of the leader is, or the rotation we set at the end, this is rotating that formation position in that space. Then we add the offset to our source location. So that's why we needed to save that original location. Otherwise, we'll just be getting further and further apart because this location is changing each time. We've updated our command data, and that's going to automatically go back because it's passed by reference, and the location for that unit is set. In our update, where we update the formation and the spacing, so in here, what we want to do is when we click the HUD button, we want them to update straight away, even if they're not doing a move order. We want them to change formation. We're just going to check that we actually have a group selected. That's our function that we made before, and we just want to check that the selection is valid. So, and we only need the first unit. We just want to check that the first index of our selected is a valid index, because we're just going to use that to set a quick move order. And then we're literally just going to order them a command command selected. So we'll pass in a temporary command data. So this is just to get them to form up. So the location is going to be selected 0. So our team leader, his location. And same again, it'll just be his rotation, and it'll just be, depends how fast you want them to go, but we'll just do a normal command move. So now when we hit the button on the formation selector, it'll come through and say, okay, we're setting a new formation, and then it will fire off a move order to get everyone to form up. And we'll do the same for spacing. So in here, we'll just tell them if the spacing changes, we want you to update your position based on the new spacing. Yeah, we should be good to go. Okay, it just doesn't like that I put this in here. It needs to go at the start. It's just a warning, but it's just saying that this is out of order. So I'll move this to here, it'll stop that. It'll stop that warning. So there is one thing we need to do in the editor before we kick off, and that's assign that class reference on our player controller. So if we go to our player controller blueprint, we should have the UI section here, and this is our HUD class. So we want to have, so this is something that can get you unstuck actually, and I can show you how to fix this. But see here, we can choose our C++ class as the class reference, which is going to totally stuff it because it doesn't have references to the buttons and whatever else. It's this, you actually want this HUD class. So in your, for classes like base classes in C++ like that, you want to make them abstract. So if I quickly go to my HUD class here and go to my U class here and add abstract and then rebuild quickly, when I come back into my player controller, there's no C++ class here for me to accidentally select on, so you can't make a mistake, because sometimes you'll choose that, I've done it so many times, you'll choose that C++ class and you'll sit there trying to figure out why your HUD's not loading or whatever it is, and yeah. Right, so I was getting crashing and I realized that it was occurring on the crate formation data, and the reason why that is we made the asset manager reference, variable reference, but we never assign anything to it. So we're going to do that in begin play as well. And we can do that the same way that we do our player controller, the verify. We'll do that at the top here. So it's using the asset manager namespace, get if valid, and that will return a reference to the asset manager. So we're storing that in our asset manager variable, and we should be good to go. Right, so our HUD's loaded. We've got our little HUD text up the top there. On some heaps. And now when we select them, it should load our HUD. Yay! There's our HUD. Let's see, column. Righto, so I know what's happening there. See how not getting the highlight on the buttons. So we've got some, they're basically fighting for who's clickable here, so we can fix that. I think I know what's happened there. Just done it so many times. It'll actually be in our button, let's say. So our button image and text, we just want to change the visible to not hit testable self. So basically we're saying we can't click on these things because we only want to click on the button. So save that. Release some guys. Let's try 2 for now. The HUD works. It's highlighting. It's good. Wedge. There we go. Column. Oh, it's a bit slack. That's probably just our radius, end radius. That looks good. Let's try it for a few more. Line. Let's try our spacing. That's working. Looks good. So now the only thing we have left to do, let's check we can move first. Yep, that's good. And then what I was talking about, the local rotation, is if I set the rotation to face this way, it should turn it and calculate their positions at a different rotation. Alright, so let's code our blob now. So if we go back to our offset calculation on our player controller and our blob here. For our blob, we want to ignore position 0. So we just want him to remain in the center of the blob. He's the source of the blob. So if it's not the 0 index player or selected unit, and then we're going to calculate a circle, getting angles to a different, based on how many people we have selected, we're getting different angles all around. And you could use that to just do a perfect circle formation if you want. Is we're going to use our formation spacing just to randomize whether that, so we've got the circle and the center, we're just going to randomize the distance out so it looks like a bit of a blob. We'll create a minimum spacing, which is half our formation size, and then we'll use that same method of mod that we used for left and right just to alternate between the units, and then we'll make their spacing negative. Using that min spacing, we'll calculate a radius, so that's the distance from the center person they're going to be, and then we just need to calculate the cos and the sin of the x and y. I'm not going to pretend I understand that, but that's what angle stuff does. Cos for the x and sin for the y, and passing in our direction on the circle. And then the same will apply down here. It'll use our offset to calculate the position, and we should be good to go. So let's give that a go. Now, if we tell them to blob, they blob. They have trouble with the blob, so they don't navigate through. Probably need a bit more spacing on our blob. But they're blobbing. It's a tactical blob. Please don't forget to like if you found this tutorial helpful, and subscribe so you don't miss out on future tutorials. You can join me on Discord or sign up to my Patreon where you can get access to all my tutorials early and the project files, as well as gain access to behind the scenes on my current game development. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you next time.